Hi, good morning and happy race day. It's Fast Cars, Fast Money. We're talking about the picks video for the Cup Series. Hopefully, you guys watched our preview video. We went over a lot of kind of our initial thoughts, lineup construction, kind of what we wanted to looking for coming into this week. Now that practice and qualifying is set, let's go ahead and jump into the driver by driver breakdown. And hopefully, you guys were able to catch the Xfinity Series race. It was such a crazy finish with all three of Creed, Gregson, and Larson. They're all going for the win on the last couple laps, all of them blowing tires, getting into the wall. It was definitely one of the best finishes I've seen it in a long time. So if you haven't seen it on social media, just type in Xfinity Series Darlington finish and should be 2 4 minute video, and it's definitely worth your time. So, but that is behind us. It's in the rearview mirror. So let's look out the front windshield. Let's try to figure out how we're going to attack this slate today. So we're at Darlington. It's the second time that we are visiting this track, but this time we got 500 miles. So there's 367 laps. So because of that, we have a lot of dominator points up for grabs, 91.75 for laps led and 165.15 for fast laps. So let's keep that in mind when we're building lineups. It's really trying to get 3, maybe even 4 drivers in your line who you feel confident, who could be a potential lap leader, and then really just trying to build around them and with place differential and value plays. So let's try to figure out who some of those dominators are going to be. So for the expensive range, you got Larson, Hamlin, Elliott, Reddick, Busch, and Chastain. Now, like a lot of these drivers, obviously you're going to see high interest for a lot of them, but we'll kind of walk through them. So Larson's the most expensive at 11,400. He starts 7th, so he does give you a little bit of place differential upside. Salary and starting grid doesn't matter too much to me as long as you think they can get out front and lead laps at some point in this race. I mean, this is a long race. I think they got like 12 or 13 sets of tires, something crazy like that. I'm expecting long green flag runs, so if a driver is able to get out front and lead a ton of laps, I think it's going to be relatively easy, for them to pay off their salary as long as they, as long as their day doesn't fall apart. But we still have to keep in mind what drivers we're selecting, kind of playing that narrative out in our head of like, okay, I think this driver is going to lead and then he's going to come down pit road. And I think this driver is then going to take over. I could see this driver leading stage 3. Like you got to kind of keep that in mind when you're selecting what 6 drivers you want. But Larson really mentioned how much he liked his car Saturday for the Xfinity race, talking about his car on Sunday. He's not going to be the early lap leader starting 7th. He even admitted he thought he would have qualified a little bit better. But he did have a really good long run car. So I think Larson's just going to slowly and methodically work his way up towards the front. Now, one thing you do have to keep in mind with Larson, he is an aggressive driver. He does like to ride super close to the wall. Could we see him make a mistake? We saw that yesterday with the Xfinity Series race. Yes, he did recover and rebound, but he got into the wall, cut a tire down, went multiple laps down early on that race. Luckily, things played out. He was able to get out front, but that's always going to be your fear with Larson. He's just going to overstep the limit and potentially get himself into some trouble. But feel really, really confident with Larson. Don't really mind the price tag in the starting spot there. I would love to plug him in. Hamlin's another good play. I don't know how much ownership he's going to get, but he barely missed out on the second round of qualifying. So he starts 11th. So I like the place differential upside that Hamlin offers. He's a similar play to Larson, in my opinion, just gives you a little bit more place differential, feel a little bit more confident in Larson getting out front and leading laps. But Hamlin is a strong contender to be a lap leaders. So I like both Larson and Hamlin. Just if you're playing either of them, you have to make sure you're pairing them with someone closer to the front of the field who you think is going to be that early lap leader, whether that's Logano, whether that's Bell, whether that's Byron. We'll dive in and talk about some of those plays. Now, Chase Elliott's kind of a little bit of a head scratcher. He starts 23rd, which is surprising based off of how well he's run basically the entire year, and more specifically, how well he's run at some of these similar track types that we've been looking at 2022. too. So he's got a long road ahead of him starting 23rd. I'm not saying he can't be a potential lap leader, but looking at his practice and his qualifying times, it's hard to feel good about him potentially being a lap leader starting from 23rd. But if you are able to pair Elliott with some other drivers who can lead laps, you maybe use a place differential play, maybe he finishes fifth, eighth, then I think you have a little bit more of an argument to play Elliott. Now, if Elliott does get out front and lead some laps, man, he's going to be picking up a ton of points with all that place differential in play. But I just think he has a long road ahead of him before he potentially could get up there. Reddick's just a little bit more of a GPP option. He's very expensive. This is probably one of, if not the most expensive we've seen Reddick all year. He did finish second here earlier this year, but if you remember that first Darlington race, it was a lot of issues, a lot of good cars wrecked out, and the results weren't really as telling as the race, really how that race was playing out. Getting down to Kyle Busch there, he starts fifth. Probably in a little bit more of another tournament play, but I feel more confident in Busch than I do with Reddick that he could potentially be a lap leader. Looked like he had a really good long run car. We know Kyle Busch was pretty good here earlier in the year before he got into issues. So his ownership might be a little bit lower than it should be just based off of where he's priced and people maybe chasing Larson. But I feel pretty confident about Busch. I like him a lot for tournaments. Chastain's another driver similar to Hamlin that just missed out on the top 10. So I really like targeting those drivers that are kind of in that 11th to 15th range that just missed out on the second round of qualifying that we know have a fast car. I mean, we're talking like hundreds and tenths of a second. It's so minimal between some of these drivers. But Chastain had really good practice times over the 10 lap, the 5 lap, 15 lap, 20 lap. Doesn't really matter too much what practice times we were looking at. Chastain had a fast car. Now, he did say in his interview on Saturday that his car was really loose, that he was barely hanging on to it. I think that car will come in. I think as the track rubbers up, I'm hoping that car will tighten up a little bit, hopefully. But Chastain should be a good play. We know he's going to have a fast car. He arguably had, one of the fastest cars after Larson got into issues in the first Darlington race, but Chastain lost it coming out of turn 2, I believe. Went down and hit the inside wall, and that ended his day. Now, Logano's interesting. He starts on the pole, but his practice times do not reflect his qualifying times. So it's hard to feel confident about Logano going out there and being a lap leader, but we know clean air is king. He has he's going to be able to control the restart. He has the first selection for pit stalls. He should be able to control what lane he wants. Like, all signs are pointing to him being that early lap leader. However, I will say, if you remember, Logano actually had the pole at the first Darlington race, and Larson was able to beat him off the line. It wasn't until all these drivers had issues that we saw Logano get out front and lead laps and eventually win that race. So I still like Logano. I just wouldn't go overboard. I wouldn't go crazy. I wouldn't be shocked if, Bell gets around him early, or maybe even Byron. But Logano still has a really good shot at going out there and leading pretty much all of stage 1. My fear with Logano is maybe they just nailed it for qualifying, and maybe it's a little bit more of a short run car. And as these laps click off, maybe around lap 10, 15, maybe we could see him getting past. But still like Logano. Really like Truex. Truex and Larson are probably my 2 favorite plays if you just look at their long run speed, especially if you think this race is going to play out with long green flag runs. So I really like Larson. I really like Truex to work their way forward throughout these long green flag runs. And then it's just, what early lap leader do you want to pair them with? Do you feel confident about Logano? Do you feel confident about Christopher Bell? Maybe it's William Byron. For me, it's probably going to be Logano and Bell. I'm probably going to lean more on Bell just to try to get a little bit different. I think Logano's going to carry a lot of ownership. I like the price discount you can get with Christopher Bell. I think that makes your line a little bit different. But I really like Larson, Truex, and Bell today. and then trying to build around them. Blaney's just someone I'm probably just not going to get to. Nothing's really pointing to me. This isn't really a good track for him. I think he only has one top 10 here. His practice times weren't great. His qualifying time, yeah, he did get into the second round. All three Penske cars did, which was good to see. So they must have nailed the setup. But Blaney I just think he runs around 9th to 12th all day long. I just don't really I don't really see him moving forward from his starting position. Now, William Byron, I think, is a really good tournament play. If you're building multiple lines, if you're trying to be aggressive, trying to get a really low owned driver, I think Byron's going to be your guy. He starts third, so it's kind of a tough position to be in just because his chances of being that early lap leader aren't nearly as high as Logano and Bell's are. But he has a pretty fast car. He's been running pretty poorly as of late, so that might also keep his ownership down. But getting a potential lap leader for $8,900, I think, is a steal at his price. Same with Christopher Bell. I mean, $8,700. He was so close to the pole, barely just missed out on it. He's going to start right on that front row besides Logano. He was really happy with his car. In his interview yesterday with the Xfinity Series, he told the reporters how much he was looking forward to this race today. So I really like Christopher Bell. Hopefully he gets that early jump. Hopefully he can be the early lap leader in stage one. And hopefully he comes in a little bit under owned to the Logano chalk. Harvick's a driver I might bump up to high. I know we got a lot of high interest drivers up here, but it's really just trying to mix and match these high interest drivers. Get different with your lap leaders, and then just come down and hit some of these value ranges. But Harvick didn't really love his car in practice. He didn't really have a great qualifying run. But if you look at his track history, it's very rare to see him finishing outside of the top 10 here. It's a 500-mile race. Not really playing Harvick to be a lap leader. Maybe he's kind of that fourth driver you're plugging into your line that has the ability to lead laps, but you don't really need them to lead laps. I just can see Harvick, being there late at the end of this race in stage 3, getting a top 5, top 3, maybe even contending for the win. That team has a lot of time to work on this car and make sure it gets dialed in. Bowman's another option that I think is a pivot off of Harvick. Bowman did clip the wall a little bit in qualifying, which scrubbed a little bit of speed, not a ton. Team says there's not really any damage. They're not too worried about it. He has a really fast car. He should be able to gain some spots. Solid place differential option with, again, the ability to lead laps. I feel a little bit more confident in Harvick just with the driver skill, his place differential, and how we've seen him running as of late. But if you can't get up to Harvick, I think Bowman's a fine option. Now, Suarez is going to be extremely high owned. If you're playing cash games, just kind of lock him in. Now, he did fail tech inspection 3 times, and because of that, he was not able to take a qualifying time, and he also has a pass-through penalty to start the race. So Suarez is immediately going to go a lap down at the beginning of this race. He's going to be in last position until we get some cautions, until the end of the stage breaks. It's going to take him a little bit of time to work his way back up and get on the lead lap. But once he does, it's really just how high can you see him finishing. He had pretty good times in practice. Looks like a great place differential play. It's not going to look good early, but it should look good late. So don't be alarmed when you see Suarez scored dead last, laps down to start this race. Slowly but surely, he will work his way up throughout the field. And then really from the 8K range, it really drops off interest level wise. Briscoe, Dillon, I'm not really going to get to. Cindric's interesting, but again, probably not going to have too much of him. He had really good practice and qualifying times. All of the Penske cars did, but starting 6th, I just don't really see him advancing his position. I think it's more likely for him to fall outside of the top 10 to stay in it. Michael McDowell continues to have good runs, but for DFS purposes, it's just hard to play him starting 10th. Bubba Wallace is in the 45 car, so that'll be confusing watching throughout the day, just thinking that he's in the 23, but really that's Gibbs. Wallace is a similar play to Cindric, just a little bit cheaper, starts a little bit further back, but again, starting eighth, unless you can see them finishing inside the top 10 or maybe picking up some fast laps, it's just going to be hard to get to those drivers. But once we get down to Eric Jones, then I start getting a little bit more interested. This is arguably Eric Jones' best track. This team, Petty GMS, ran really well here in the spring. They didn't run a lot of practice laps, which is a little bit concerning, but then they came out for qualifying, put down a pretty solid qualifying time. But they were sixth fastest in practice just based off a single time. So really like Eric Jones. I think he can kind of maintain his running position, maybe even fight for top 12, on the fringe of the top 10 there. Really like that. Just with that extra place differential safety that you get with Jones versus a Wallace and or Cindric. Gibbs starts 21st. Just, it's more just kind of about the experience for him. He's not really racing for anything. He's just trying to get more experience in this car, learn to most likely take over one of these cup cars next year. So this is just a learning opportunity for him. Not really too interested there for DFS. Christopher Buescher did both the RFK cars, didn't really have great qualifying times. Both of them start, kind of deeper in the field, 27th to 25th. We would lean to Buescher. He's only $200 more expensive. Buescher's just been running better this year. So if you need a place differential play like Buescher, but my favorite play in the 6K range is going to be Stenhouse. Don't know how much ownership he's going to get. Starts 20th, which might keep some ownership off of him. But if we look at where Stenhouse has run well this year, it's been at these steep intermediate tracks. Stenhouse has not been running well as of late, but we haven't really been to these kind of steep intermediate tracks as of late either. It's been a lot of road courses. It's been a lot of short tracks. It's just been super speedways. It's kind of been getting away from the tracks that we saw him run well at. So he didn't really run a lot of laps in practice like Jones, which is a concern. But he has a similar driver. His driver rating looks relatively good. And he finished second at Dover and he finished eighth at Darlington in the spring. So if we can see some of those repeat top 10 performances, Stenhouse is in for a great day today. Almirola, probably not really going to get to. He's pretty cheap starting 22nd, so I don't mind going there. If you can't get to Stenhouse, if you can't get to Buescher, if you can't get to Jones, I think Almirola is a fine option. No interest in Haley, Castle, or Hemrick. And then once you get down to the pump plays, I think it's just spreading out your ownership between Dillon, Custer, LaJoie, Gilliland, and Burton. I will say Burton is my least favorite of these options. I really like Dillon with his upside. Custer has, good equipment. LaJoie gives you the most place differential, is probably the safest, and Todd Gilliland is the cheapest and the easiest to get in line. So all of them should score relatively close to each other in points. They all start right next to each other. It's just, for me, it's really starting with what drivers you think can be those lap leaders, plugging in those 3 to 4 drivers, and then just kind of seeing where you fall out with salary and, grabbing a punt play or two. And if you can, trying to grab a Jones, a Buescher, a Stenhouse to kind of, balance out your line. So that's going to do it for the Cup Series picks. Hopefully that's been helpful. If it has, leaving a like on the video is always appreciated. Hitting that subscribe button is appreciated as well. Slowly but surely, we're working our way up to 1,000 subs. We'll post this spreadsheet over on Twitter. It's at FastCarsFM. Any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below or hit us up on Twitter. Otherwise, have a good Labor Day weekend and enjoy the race tonight.